A little Beastie Boys to start us off today. How's it going? It's Nick. Bored on a Monday night. Internet's up. Thought throw the mic on and talk a little bit about NDL and the off season so far. We finally had a pretty active week. I don't know if it's a week. Yeah, 2 weeks actually, because we just celebrated a new year. And yeah, it's time to get looking at some of these off-season moves that some teams have done. Some of them are pretty interesting. Other things we'll be talking about is the Hall of Fame, the Rule 5 draft, and anything that really comes to my mind while I'm looking at things on my computer screen. So, without further ado, let's start. Um, you know what? We'll do Rule 5 first. It was kind of interesting this year. We had a lot more movement than I would have anticipated, especially when people were talking about a lot of key players being kept, and then other names like Santiago Martinez and Jay Oliver being kept last moment. Trying to head into the transaction log right now, and I just noticed that Jay Oliver was drafted first overall by the Indianapolis Caucasians, and then going second or fourth overall, sorry, was John Moser to the Miami Vice. We had Clarence Williams leaving. We had Phil Corrigan going from Miami to Philadelphia. Eugene Gutierrez, solid. Reliever going to Albany from Cincy. Uh, Washington lost Harvey Miller. LA lost Jose Melendez. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. All in all, about 20, 25 names left. It's a lot of roster spots that are going to be held by Rule 5 players next year. Kind of interesting. I expect some of them to be sent back to their original teams. There was a couple not so bright moves, such as the Toronto Aces Rule 5ing a 17-year-old player who's not even remotely close to being ready for the pros. But when you're winning around 100 games a year, I guess you can hide one player in the majors without it being a big deal. And that's the Rule 5. We'll move on to the off-season center. Finally, the money started to pour in. It looks like one team is spending the most. Actually, two teams. We'll start with the big signing of the offseason so far, and that was starting pitcher Juan Cintron, who has signed a 6-year, $106 million deal to go to Orange County. Orange County just bolstered their roster to add him. He looks to be their number 2, potentially number 3 starter. That's always solid to have. His stamina is a little concerning over the 6-year period, but by about year 4, worst case scenario, he could be an extremely elite reliever, almost unstoppable closer. They also added a reliever in Jose Morales to a 4-year, $39 million contract. Morales last year with Winterfell at 38 saves, 2.97 ERA, 13.4 Ks per 9, 147 ERA plus. All in all, extremely solid player. Kind of gives up the long ball a little too much, but I'm sure that won't be a problem in Orange County. The other surprise team that was putting in some financial weight was the Hillsboro Hops. I was going to call them Hillsbillions or something like that. But no, the Hillsboro Hops, they have definitely been going in. They spent $47.5 million on a relief pitcher, Norberto Gonzalez. There was a lot of action on him, but eventually he just got to be too expensive. At 25 years old, and with 2 extremely blue elite pitches, he should be strong for all 5 years. And at $9.5 million, it's not really that big of a deal if he helps shut down 40 games a year. They also signed Roberto Rock Jaramillo, whatever the fuck. Oh, excuse my language. But yeah, he had a come see, come saw season. Actually, it looks like an extension because it appears he's already played for them the last 2 years. Keeping some homegrown talent, keep the fans happy. Let me see what his contract is. $5 million. I was overlooking it for what he provides. Nearly a 100, solid 1.4 WAR at like 3 or 4 million. Yeah, no, my bad. No, that's pretty solid. Ideal number 4 on a team. I'll take him any day of the week. Looking through the other names, it appears that Montreal went in. Oh boy. Yeah, actually, they were probably the most active team, and I didn't even talk about it. They started off by signing Cordell Anderson early on for a nice 1-year, $3 million contract. He He missed all of 2043, but he's staying in Canada. He's coming straight over from Toronto. Rumor has it he stayed there in the off-season training, even though Toronto isn't exactly the warmest place in the off-season, but I digress. He looks to be a solid number 5, worst case scenario, pretty good reliever who can be a long reliever, middle reliever if need be. A couple other names that Montreal went after. Jose Lopez, pitcher. Jose Lopez has had some decent years. He had a pretty down year last year. Let's see, but for 1.52 or 1.152, that's nothing to complain about. It's nothing on the dollar. They spent 1.18 on Jorge Silva, former number 8 overall, I think it was. Number 9 overall, I remember that because he wanted too much money, so he dropped to Dillonville. But the 37-year-old gets that one-year deal he was looking for, $1.8 million. Last year, he was solid in 5 total games, 41 innings. But he's not exactly going to strike out many people, so you need to have an elite defense behind him, or else you're going to be in some trouble. A couple other names. Montreal really attacked the rotation part because they got Jack Wolf, 33-year-old, at a 3.5 over 2 years, so 7 total. And he had a pretty solid year as a reliever for Winterfell last year as he pitched in 32 games, 49 innings. Pretty low BABIP. Might have been a little lucky because it looks like in the other years it was much higher. If he starts for them, even though that stamina is pretty low, expect him to be like a 4 or 5, but he could still give them some innings. And then finally, they spent $1.3 million on Phil Bowman, who he's all right, I suppose. Nothing great. $1.3 million though. He has really solid contact, lacks power. Probably going to play third base for them. I can't see him really going to second base with that range and error low. Strong arm too, so might as well take advantage of that 100 arm and put him at third so you get across the field. If so, you might be able to get some more value out of him. But for like 1.5 million, it's not really much to complain about. Now, I guess we'll talk about the one individual who made it into the Hall of Fame this year, and that was Marty Crow, the center fielder who, looking at his numbers, spent his career in 5 different organizations, starting in Houston, going to SoCal, which then relocated to Cincinnati, spending a couple of years in Shelltown before going to Miami for the middle of his years, and spending his final year in Cooksville at the age of 36. All in all, he amassed a 71.1 WAR. He had a total average 287, 376, 431. He had 473 stolen bases to 175 home runs. He was just a freak athlete. He was a freak player, and well deserving of being in the Hall of Fame. Now you can make some arguments that a couple other players are pretty deserving. And I feel like they're a couple of years away. Kevin Thomas doesn't have that hate that he used to have, a la Roger Clemens in real life. I feel like if you give him a couple more years, people will turn around to him. Men line, women line numbers don't, and even though there's some thought that there was some shady work done with players like this, at the end of the day, we still allowed them in the league. They still competed in the league. They still have bad years. I'm looking at Kevin Thomas with a 7 ERA, a 5.47 in the middle of his career. 4.25. It wasn't obviously the norm. The norm is he's dominating, but it is what it is. He was a 7-time All-Star. He was the Rookie of the Year and 2-time Tom Seaver Award winner. It's probably should have been like a 10-time, but people weren't going wrong. Ian Harrison, I think, might have a chance. The one who's going to be the really interesting one will be William Thomas, because people love to hate on closers, myself included. We feel that they don't exactly provide much, but at the end of the day, this guy was freakishly dominant. And even with some off years of his career, he still had a 2.49 ERA, still had a 9.4 K per 9 over his career, 34.4 WAR. Like, these are numbers that you would gladly take on your team. 611 saves, 95 and 94. I mean, what was it? 0.4 home runs per 9 for his whole career. 1.16 whip. These are phenomenal. Like, I mean, I get it. Closer's a closer. They pitch 1 inning in a game, usually that they're winning. I have my thoughts on him too, but he did play the position and he dominated the position. So if anything, we should reward him by being the best at his position, especially with the little meltdown we had with the Hall of Fame, which apparently burned to the ground and we had to buy a new one. But yeah, I feel like he's a year or two away, and a couple people changed their opinion, and a few of these. Also, in the process of, I thought I saw some names that were different. Apparently, they're just the same. But there was some new upcoming eligible players. But it was just the ones that didn't get voted in. I'm just gonna look over my notes. Going forward, I noticed that usually this is around the season where back to free agents that they start to sign. There's still some monster names out there. Their value will eventually drop their asking price, but expect Carlos Varela, Eric White, Scott Wright, Pablo Esparza, Peter Knox, Dan Becker, Matthew Corbett, and Dennis Garcia, who's very underrated and so low. I expect them all to sign probably by next sem. So this will be it for now for this one. It's not exactly the longest week. There's not really any notes. I'm just going on the cusp or on the fly. So tomorrow there's a new download. Hopefully there's some big action. I'll be able to address more things. As always, NDL, have a good night.